Welcome to the Barcelona Podcast, episode 167, and this opinion is brought to you by the most influential voices in the FC Barcelona community. I'm Dan Hilton, and I am joined today by who else but Francesc Tomas. Francesc, the international break ended, then we retreated to that all-time classic of a game against Leganés. I mean, my eyes were just watering with joy with how wonderful it was to watch such a sight, a footballing marvel, if you will.
Well, I don't know what game you were watching then. I'm very surprised. You may be being sarcastic. Who knows?
I think, yeah, some of the sarcasm is getting lost from here to Qatar, I would say.
Yeah, of course. The game that got here to the Middle East was horrendous, filthy, abhorrent, terrible. It was disgusting. It was a terrible game. And I'm sorry that we start the podcast like this, but you need to call a spade a spade. It was difficult to watch.
Well, in the show, I think there are two positives to be taken from this. One, the 3 points were captured on the road. Sure, that's great. And then part two is that we got to see Moussa Vague out there, and Junior Firpo also got a game. Okay, and then there's the positive. So let's move on to the listener questions. Here we go. George asked, what was the 4-2-3-1 setup from Valverde? George also thought it was pretty horrendous. Players had no idea where they needed to be. Even Leo was found in a defensive midfielder position at times to pick the ball up, dropping deep, Griezmann invisible. Passes were too sideways to the players' positions and forced a lot riskier passes to the feet of Suarez and Leo. George actually asked many, many questions. George, this is the one I went with because I think for a lot of the Kool-Aids, and we've gotten tons of listener questions in the past asking why doesn't Valverde trot out Dembele, Griezmann, Messi, Suarez all together. So we finally did get to see what is largely the most experimental formation that he could have gone with, and that was almost out of necessity. Artur, probably because he was coming back from international duty, was not even called up to the team because we're expecting to see him for 90 minutes against Dortmund, so expect him to see there. Lenglet will be back as well. So it was a little bit of a makeshift team, but it wasn't too crazy. You still had MTT and PK back there. You still had Messi, Suarez, Griezmann, Dembele, Busquets, De Jong. You still had everybody. The personnel was the same. It's just a formation change of 4-2-3-1. And, you know, Francesc, as crazy as the formation sounds on paper, we'd be too attacking. Not only were we not too attacking, but I don't think too much changed.
No, nothing much changed. I think if anything did is the fact that there were many more players in the middle. And because there were many more players in the middle, we were even more predictable than we have been. And that's been difficult to achieve. I mean, if you're going to go for a 4-2-3-1, then obviously the two wingers need to be open. But when you've got Griezmann constantly sort of drifting towards the middle because that's his natural position and that's where he feels the most comfortable, then it's not going to work. I mean, defending against a team that attacks to the middle is incredibly easy. You know, even during the Guardiola years, at the very end of it, when we played against Mourinho, when we played against teams that, like Chelsea, for example, they knew how to defend against it. And, you know, that team had Xavi, Iniesta, etc. Obviously, Messi, Henry, David Villa, and not even that team could attack from the middle. So if you're going to break defenses, and, you know, we're playing, let's just stop for a second. We're playing Leganés. You know, with all due respect, we're playing Leganés away from home, fair enough, but in La Liga, they were the worst, well, they still are, the worst team in the whole of La Liga. And we're talking about breaking defenses and comparing them to Inter Milan. You know, like I'm flabbergasted to even be saying that, but that is the position in which this manager and this board have taken us. So if you want to break a defense that basically sits back and relaxes and tries to cover gaps, then you need to widen them. You need to keep them guessing. And in order to attract, so say you open the ball to, say, Dembele, starting from the line on the side, then someone's going to try and go and cover him. Then that's going to generate a space behind. But when Dembele is drifting towards the middle with the ball rather than going towards the byline, then those spaces all get reduced. And you can add the fact that the players were not really that mobile. You can add the fact that the formation seems to be changing every 2 minutes because the manager doesn't really know what he's doing. And you can also add the fact that, you know, key players' heads are not really in it. Then it goes back to Messi. Then it goes back to what Messi can do. I mean, you can only imagine what this team will without Messi's magic. You can only imagine, you know, because beyond Messi, the only player that really is performing at a level that is expected, and this is in terms of returns, not in terms of play, is Luis Suarez. You know, Luis Suarez actually scoring the goals. I know he's got a lot of criticism, but he's actually responding in terms of goals. You've got Ter Stegen that has saved several points throughout the season. Also, we've gotten very lucky that Atletico and Madrid, even though Madrid seem to be picking up a little bit later, they haven't really been that great. And if you go into the stands, into the La Liga Clasificación, we're at the top. And you could argue that the team is doing all right because we're winning and we're at the top. But the reality is that the team is mediocre at best, and the reality is that any team can hurt us. And also that we've got Dortmund and Atletico coming up this week, and all we can do is just hope that Valverde actually finds the starting 11 and sticks with it. Let's hope that Artur comes back into the equation, because this guy has been, he was a starter. I wasn't sold because his previous season wasn't amazing, but with a bit of confidence, he started growing, and then all of a sudden he disappears, doesn't even get called up.
I think it's interesting we talk about Dortmund and Atletico Madrid coming up this week, because as you mentioned with Atletico Madrid, they're drawing themselves out of first place. That's what they're doing. I mean, Atletico Madrid are not getting results at all. They're just settling for 0-0s, 1-1s across the board in La Liga, and that's dooming their season. And Dortmund in the same way. They're in bad, terrible form right now. And Dortmund, with Lucien Favre, he has not got the backing of his board at Dortmund at all in the way that Ernesto Valverde has gotten the confidence of the board at Barcelona. And I know people say a lot of times that mark of confidence from a board usually means a death sentence, but Lucien Favre, after getting annihilated in the Bundesliga by Bayern Munich, they've fallen themselves into a Europa League spot, and they're the team that is on the cusp of being knocked out of the Champions League. Not necessarily Barca and Inter Milan. It just winds up that is kind of as expected to be. It was going to be a group of death, and Slavia Praha getting the draws that they did, it kind of did muddy the group even more. So teams didn't get 3 points there, including Barcelona. And so I think when it comes to the way that they're playing, what worried me about that Leganés game too is I think you're right, that the way that Dortmund and Atletico Madrid line up, I'm worried about not only a 4-2-3-1, because that's what Valverde is going to do. He's most likely going to switch back to that 4-3-3. I don't see why he wouldn't with Artur coming back in the lineup with De Jong and Busquets most likely. But Messi dropping so deep, I've mentioned this in the past, that we get on Dembele for giving the ball up, and Leganés's goal in that game came off a giveaway by Dembele in a bad spot on the field. And as I said, I'm okay with Dembele giving the ball away, but there are, as the Patreons heard me say on the Patreon show afterwards, that there's the balancing of the scales, that Dembele does not give you enough positives to make up for him losing the ball. And so we all see that and we critique him. Messi, when he drops as deep as he did, because he really was the attacking midfielder in that front three, if you will, so he was dropping so deep and getting the ball. And the problem with Barcelona is, as we see, when he drops deep, that pushes out Busquets and De Jong. And, credit, I think, to Busquets. He wasn't fantastic in that game, but he was getting everywhere he needed to be on the field. But when he and De Jong were so wide, as Messi was coming back to collect the ball, because you don't want to bring your defenders close to Messi either, now they're out wide, and Messi didn't have an immediate outlet. And if he's going to drop so deep, that was what made it so great about his relationship with Xavi and Iniesta. They were still only 10, 15 yards away. So even when Messi back in the day would drop so deep, when at the times that he was a false nine, he immediately had an outlet. And that outlet isn't there anymore. It's either on the wings, or it's a risky pass, as George indicated, up to Suarez or to Griezmann, or it's something that there are no 1-2s right after he receives the ball. And then if Messi turns and runs at 3 or 4 defenders, when he gives the ball away, he gives it away in a rough spot to be. And Messi, however, when you look at those balancing scales, we've always talked about it. Messi gives you, he could give the ball away right in front of Ter Stegen's net, and we go, the positives still outweigh the negative, even if he gives the ball away in his own penalty box. You know what I mean? So we're not going to get on Messi, and we don't critique him for that same way when he gives the ball away, because so many times the end product of that is better than it is negative. But the same can't be said of Dembele, because he's not doing that, and the same can be said of Griezmann. So we got a question from Leonardo about Griezmann. We're going to keep this conversation going. It's basically the same thing. How long will Griezmann take to adapt to playing with Messi? When can we say the decisive Griezmann we saw at Atletico and on the first couple of games is gone? What's missing for him to be that great player we know?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? At this moment in time, who knows? I mean, it is quite disheartening, but I've got no idea, because, we're nearly December and we're still looking at a team that seems to have just sort of got together yesterday. Normally, you've got pre-season and you build those sort of relationships and that sort of ground tactical awareness and knowledge, and you establish the mechanisms and you get those relationships flowing. The preseason didn't work like that. It was more about sort of broadcasting the brand of Barca and basically making a couple of bucks here and there. And then because that was flawed, then all of that time was gone. And then obviously Messi's injury at the beginning of the year didn't help either, although you can argue he's keeping him fresher now, but who knows. And the team is just not gelling, and I think that it's all about disenchantment. It's all about lack of motivation. It's all about lack of know-how as well, because these managers should not have started the season. Players don't really believe in him. He's making the whole environment far too easy and far too comfortable for the vacas sagradas, which are the sacred cows, which are the untouchables, basically. And there are some players that just shouldn't have been in the squad to start. And they are the ones that are keeping him in the job. And because they're keeping him in the job, they are keeping the dressing room happier and sort of just ticking over to extend this, what I can only describe as an agony. Barca used to be a team that everyone around the world was looking forward to watching every weekend. Certainly, you supported Barca at the time. Then it was even more of a joy to do that. And you couldn't wait to tell people about what Messi and Iniesta and Xavi, etc., Puyol even, Dani Alves were doing over the weekend, and that's no longer there. I mean, it is painful. I for one, I mean, I don't, but I've got loads of temptation of just looking away and just doing something else, because it is quite embarrassing. The team lacks identity. These constant formation changes are not taking the team anywhere, and what Valverde is trying to do is just, look, I'm going to put all my expensive players in there and hope that they save it. But, as great as players are, they need guidance. And without guidance, they just keep running into each other's spaces, and they're not complementing each other. They're actually making each other's existence more difficult.
Yeah, for sure. I think when it comes to the situation with Griezmann, you wonder, and I don't want to call it blame, but you wonder to put the onus and responsibility about what change needs to happen. Does it come from within the player, or is it one of those things that I think we're starting to chalk up some of the issues we have fundamentally in the team, and you say that's not going to change unless the manager changes? Or is it things that a specific player has to do to work their way out of the issue? Now, Luis Suarez, over the last few seasons to start the year, he always starts slow, and we do say that Luis Suarez, regardless of the manager, finds his way out. It's the same thing under Enrique that it's now been under Valverde, except he's a little older now. But for Griezmann, 4 goals, 3 assists, none in the Champions League. 2 of those goals, as you remember, coming against Real Betis in the second match of the season. And he hasn't scored now since Eibar over a month ago, and that's why all the negativity is coming out now. He's been on the left 12 times and in the middle 4 times. And as I want to harken back to, we remember that he got his start. He was a different player then, but he got his start at Real Sociedad. There is a winger in there that knows how to score goals, but that's certainly not how he profiles anymore. He's admitted that he is really Diego Simeone's center forward still, that he still is that secondary striker, the player that he played for against Atletico Madrid. But yeah, as I said, when it comes to Valverde, there are certain things, and I think Griezmann and I'm going to put Dembele and Coutinho all in the same mix, that there's an inability for this manager to get something out of that third partner with Luis Suarez and Messi. And certainly some of the onus is on those 2 players, but they play their game. There has to be some kind of instruction, some kind of idea that changes things up. And it's not just Valverde, it's the rest of his staff as well. I mean, it's even the experience of Suarez and Messi. How are they not watching tape and recognizing what the improvements need to be made? I think there's some responsibility shared on everybody, but when it comes to Griezmann's failings, sure, so much of it is on him, but we've seen just how good he is and what he's capable of. And I don't think, as I mentioned when I'm trying to think what game it was, this is now over a month ago, his heat map put him back as basically the left back. And there's no way that Griezmann is possibly going to succeed if 30 to 40% of the time, because of the defensive shape they have, he's all the way back in the left back position, switching places with Jordi Alba, but Alba's not making an effect either, especially now that he's injured. So let's keep talking about the squad, and we're going to keep this show moving today. Guatham says, what's the future of Alenya? Will Wage ever be on the bench when Nelson Semedo and Sergi Roberto are back? Francesc, I'm going to go first on this one. George had mentioned about replacing Dani Alves in one of his many questions that we couldn't get to, but the one thing I want to say, George, to that real quick, Dani Alves, one of the best, and let me get this straight, midfielders of his generation. Look at him in Sevilla, one of the best midfielders I think he could have been playing at the right back spot. That makes him one of the best attacking right backs ever, not just in this century. Dani Alves is one of the best. attacking right backs ever. And the argument can be made is he's arguably harder to replace simply because of the position he played than Xavi and Iniesta. Guys that talented, they're midfielders. That's the way it works. That guys who are that good on the ball, who are able to do those things as they're moving forward, those guys, you put them either as near the goal or you put them in the center of the field to control everything. But Dani Alves did it from the right back spot, which is otherworldly. I don't know if we're going to see somebody like that come along in world football for quite some time. Now, if it's not Wagué, though, and this is an idea I was thinking about, that the idea has to be, and this goes back to Alenya, that Alenya is going to be loaned out. I don't think Alenya's time at Barca is done. There's a number of players on this list. Unfortunately, it looks like Todibo's going to be sold. And actually, I could yell about that for an entire show. I'm so frustrated with that I don't actually want to touch how Todibo's played 4 matches in 2 years and how Ronald Araujo for Barca B has gotten better and improved. Obviously, because he's playing with Barcelona B and Todibo is not getting any game time, so a teenager is not going to get better. That's all obvious stuff. So why do you think he's being sold? Well, because Barca can make some money on the potential that nobody saw him have on the field. But in the moments that he was shown in the last 2 years, he's been fine, and he's been good enough, and he looks like a 19-year-old with a lot of promise. And as I think my big argument, this is going to go into the next question as well, there are high-end starter talent, and you don't know when guys are teenagers, sure, but Todibo has not looked like a run-of-the-mill average center back. He has not looked like a depth option. He looks like a future starter, which is my frustration to sell a guy like him. Now, Wagué, I'm half sold, half not on. He's had bright moments, whether it was Senegal, obviously at the World Cup going back then. He was very good in Belgium, but it's a different league. It's a different stakes every single game. So has Wagué not looked up to it in training? Sure. Yeah, certainly he is not good enough to overtake Semedo or Roberto. But if Wagué, who's not going to be a high-end starter, is seen as superfluous, well then they have still, Barcelona can go and grab Emerson, the 20-year-old at Real Betis, who's been a starter. So I think the key here is when it comes to the right back position, this is unfortunate because it's become as important it is to world football and the formation and getting forward. I mean, isn't it tremendous when Barca have at least half of it? It's still Jordi Alba on the left, but wouldn't it be great if the left back spot or whoever is going to succeed Jordi Alba eventually, maybe it is Junior Firpo, can stay at home a little more, like an Eric Abidal, and then the right back spot is the marauding part on the other side. Who knows? But Emerson has been good at Real Betis, and my opinion is you either bring in players getting first-team football. You know, it's tough for Barca to say, okay, Wagué eventually will groom you because they don't get the time to be groomed. That doesn't work that way. So either bring in a player getting first-team football or trust in La Masia, who at the moment don't necessarily have a top-level right back coming through anytime soon. Sergio Rosales is only 18. I don't even think he's considered a top-level La Masia, definitely a future starter at Barcelona in the way that some of the other talents are there. So the right back spot is not one that's really has a lot of depth in La Masia. But yeah, I mean, for me, when I look at other talents around the world too, Sergino Dest, and he just declared to be a U.S. player, which, yeah, I'm a little biased on that. But I think if he was with the Netherlands, because he's at the moment almost a starter for Ajax, he's splitting time with Mazraoui, who's come back, the Moroccan center midfielder turned right back. You heard that at the beginning of this answer. And so they're splitting time now, but Sergino Dest is still a teenager as well, but he's starting in the first team. He's getting Champions League minutes. So those are the places you got to look. Guys you can get for less than 10 million, and I think Sergino Dest is a guy that has high-level starter potential, just like Emerson. So if Moussa Wagué is not part of that, well, then I think he's a guy that unfortunately should be sold, because at the moment, it's Semedo, it's Roberto. None of them are going anywhere anytime soon. Unless you sell Semedo, then you better have a replacement. But Alenya, he's going to go out on loan, and maybe he'll come back for another manager. It's unfortunate, Gotham, but that's how it is.
Yeah. I was listening to what you were saying and the amount of players from La Masia that you're mentioning. It's frustrating because I could really do with a season in which we don't play amazingly, which is this one, and our results weren't great, which again is also this one. But then at the same time, we've got some La Masia sort of bright sparks growing and getting playing time. I could do with being second, third, fourth in the league, and then having Alanya, Puig, and even Abel Ruiz getting a sniff here and there, Wagué starting, Junior Firpo being given the chance, maybe even, I know he's not here anymore, but Oriol Busquets, different players who would be growing and would be sort of getting somewhere. Obviously, Ansu Fati having more regular playing time as well. I could live with that because that something special is being built. Is what in the NBA is called a rebuilding season, or rebuilding sort of period, like the 76ers were building the process for like 5-6 years. I'm all right with that, because you've got players that at Barca, given the amount of money that the club has, they can always sign the stars from here, there, and everywhere. I mean, if you think about it, you mentioned before, Dembele, Coutinho, and Griezmann, they've all been over 100 million euros, and that's been generous. I think it's 385 million euros have been spent on those three players together.
Yeah, and you get the same production out of Fati. You get the same production. But the question I just want to push back is, Francesc, the argument is that Messi is now, what's Messi's timeline? You can't. It's impossible to sell that to a fan base that a Messi year is a rebuilding year. I don't see how those ideas work together.
Of course, but that's where I'm going. So if we were to have a season which is as terrible as, in terms of game and in terms of sort of the output and the way that we're playing, because in terms of results, it hasn't really been that bad, considering that we're top of La Liga, obviously, and arguably it's everyone else's fault because they're also losing. But I could live with that. I could give the children a chance to shine, but obviously it's not happening, and it just feels like a wasted year so far. And something really does have to give and change.
Yeah, Eric asked a similar question, asking about playing time for Carlos Perez. Do you think he's better served staying and practicing with the first team, or going to the B team and getting regular game time? And then the same should have been said about Todibo back in the time. And I mean, almost Alenia, though he's now too old for the B team. Not actually too old for Barcelona B, but he really is of a different level than the third division in Spain. Wague the same way. He's too good for the third division in Spain. So Eric asked about Perez, and again, this is cutthroat. And I've always had the same opinion about Perez, and I think his time with the first team has proved me right, that there are players with the potential to be starters, and then there are players who are just good enough to get time and are good enough to be coming off the bench for Barcelona. And Perez is that second one. He's a player who is good enough to come off the bench, but I don't know how valuable it is to invest a lot of time in is. I mean, the one we always mention is Pedro, because Pedro wasn't a guy who seemed to be having high-level potential. He wasn't one of those great players from Barca B. He was a member of that system that he just wound up being this unselfish, perfect foil, perfect fit into the Barcelona system. I think Carlos Perez could be that kind of thing, but you look at Ansu Fati and Puig, ES Moriba, who I've spoken about, and Alejandro Balde, one of the younger left backs. And while Balde and Moriba, and I mean obviously Fati's a teenager too, but those are four players that even at young ages are earmarked to be top level starters. So those are guys that you really do consider and worry about. And then again, you have guys like Álvaro Ruiz, who was considered one of those top level talents for a long time. And the only argument for Álvaro Ruiz is he's still just 19. So he's still developing. Don't worry about it. And so guys could be top-level talents. But now Carlos Perez he's nearing 22, and now he's at a point where he has to get first-team football. If he's going to be a starter, if he's going to really take off in his career, he's going to have to be getting time, and unfortunately that's not going to be happening at Barca. So I'd rather, as you just mentioned, I'd much rather give any Carlos Perez minutes now to Ansu Fati. And I think the way that the roster's set up with Messi, Suarez, Griezmann, Dembele, you go four deep, and then Fati is the fifth in that lineup, and then you have other talents in La Masia that if you truly did, in case of emergency, break glass, we could see a Kiko Severio. You could see him just come on for the last 15 minutes if needed. Alex Callado is actually the other one. Alex Callado is still just 20, and he's a guy that has played both wing and midfield, and he could certainly fill in if necessary when you needed the sixth attacker or you needed somebody to sit on the bench from the B team just in case you needed somebody on the wing. So I think for Carlos Perez, the best way forward for him is unfortunately away from the club. It's no disservice to him. I think he's a tremendous player, but I don't think he's a high-level needs to be in the starting 11 for Barcelona 5 years from now, and I think that's what just detracts me from that.
Yep, I cannot disagree with that. I actually think Carlos Perez will be better as a right back for Barca, because if you think about it, when Semedo and Sergio Roberto are there, Wague hasn't really taken off. I think Carlos Perez would be a good choice there.
Yeah, I mean, and Wague wasn't bad, but yeah, it's just you got a logjam between Roberto, Semedo, Wague, and if you throw Carlos Perez in there, that nobody is an instant put him down as the starting right back. That's still the problem. Nelson Semedo's improved, but yeah, Barcelona do not have a guaranteed starting right back.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, I agree, totally.
Well, we end this going into the ad break on an agreement. Let's see if we can get some more disagreements on the other side of it. So let's head to that ad break. All right, we're going to pick up the pace of the show. We asked can try to get some quicker questions here at the end. But before we get to that, we have a question from Rick. He asks, we've been saved a lot by super subs and a lot of goals from set pieces. And obviously, what's like an S. I'm conflicted on whether that is a positive in getting the vital 3 points in a tense title race or quite negative in that we can't finish games from direct play. How do you guys rate this current Barca trend? I've got the numbers for you, Francesc, before you answer. 7 of the 35 goals in 13 La Liga games have come from players off the bench, including Vidal on Saturday, and that is most in La Liga. That actually most in all of the top 5 leagues. And Atalanta in Serie A is at 6. PSG and Parma in La Liga and Serie A at 5, respectively. The players who've scored were Vidal twice, Luis Suarez twice, Fati, Artur, and Busquets. And the only thing I would say, Rick, about, I think those are two different ideas. Stuff coming from set pieces and stuff coming from super subs. I have no issues, and I think it is a compliment again to Valverde that his subs are making an impact on the game. But you hear the names that I mentioned, Suarez with 2, Artur, Busquets. Those are starting players coming in off the bench when they're getting rotated and making an impact in games. I think that should happen. Not to take anything away from Valverde making these decisions. Sure, he has to make the right choices, but again, it's not like he's taking a chance on a... He did that with Fati. That's where the only credit lies. That when Fati came off, got his goals, he was, again, a 16-year-old kid. Who could have expected that was going to happen? So that was a great job by Valverde there. Great call. But again, the other guys are all guys who are normally in the starting lineup and know how to play football and know how to impact matches. So it's not that it's a super sub role that is being taken by any of these guys. Again, I think they're just, again, starters who are starting those games on the bench. So again, I guess good on Valverde for putting them into the game, but I don't read too much into that because of the quality of player that's scoring those goals.
Yeah, I mean, scoring goals is always good. It doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter what they look like. So the only bit that I can add is that 6 out of the last 7 goals from Barca have come from set pieces, in terms of free kicks, in terms of penalties, and also in terms of actually heading across coming in from a set piece. That can only be a positive because goals are goals and they all count. But my worry is that a lot of people are being masked, a lot of excuses are being made, and a lot of difficulties are being hidden because these goals keep coming. Obviously, I'd rather Barca scores than not, don't get me wrong, but you can't really have people like Piqué was talking the other day saying that we cannot really be that bad if we're top in the league. And in the press conference, Ernesto Valverde constantly saying, I'm worried that you keep asking me whether I'm worried or not. I'm not worried we're top in the league. I think that's a very simplistic analysis that sooner rather than later, unless things change and everybody sort of gets a rocket where the sun don't shine, then things are not going to get better.
Yeah, the set piece point I think is important to note because the set piece thing, believe it or not, there is a positive, there is a silver lining in that. And it's that Messi has become so dominant on set pieces. He's become so dominant at free kicks, and even the goal, it was kind of broken, the one Luis Suarez puts in the back of the net. But I think that Messi has just gotten so good when the ball is on the ground and in those kind of situations that it's going to continue to make him such an important part of the team, and it's going to help Messi continue to make an impact on games even as he continues to age. But the team, as we've always talked about, the trend is that the team has to be changing around him, and as we've been yelling now for about 2 years now, the team behind Messi, if they're long in the tooth as well, and nobody is pressing and nobody is moving, that really sets Barcelona up for failure. So I think those things can be separate. I think in open play, things should be happening, but the fact that Barca are scoring on set pieces is great. But I don't think that's a team that relies on it. I think those set pieces are coming just from the magic of Messi. And that's okay that it's just coming from the foot of Messi because he's improved on set pieces. So that's okay with me. Let's move on. We're going to now pick up, I guess we'll call this a lightning round. We'll go a little quick fire here as we end the show. Ronald asks, if Piqué is suspended, who would be the preferred defensive pairing for an upcoming match? And I think this one's pretty obvious, right, Francesc?
Well, it's got to be Umtiti and Leclerc. There's nobody else.
Yeah, and if Todibo does leave in January, again, I'm thinking about writing an article for BarcaBlind.com about this. I wrote a really glowing piece about Todibo about a month ago. Clearly, somebody at Barcelona had taken that, ripped it up, and thrown it in the trash, and now they're willing to sell him to Bayer Leverkusen. And even if they put a buyback
Terrible people for doing that. Terrible people.
Well, even if they put a buyback in there for him, I think that's the big worry about how they do business. And I think this also sets up a larger argument. As Ron asked, who would you rather see leave in the January transfer window, Vidal or Rakitic? Let me answer that one quickly. It's Rakitic because I think he could fetch more money. It looks like Barcelona is in a moment where you can talk about a player that I love in Dani Olmo, who would be returning to Barcelona if he did return over the summer or whenever it would be for a lot of money. But for Barca, if they're going to keep going Galactico shopping and looking around and thinking about buying players for 70, 90 million euro, we talk about the Ligt, but sure, but with what money? If Barca really did truly need to take out a loan to get Antoine Griezmann, and they're pinching every penny where they have to sell off Todibo, who has that kind of promise, and there's much, much larger problems underneath the surface. And the big worry there, I think, and this is, again, just beyond that, it has nothing to do with PK, but when it comes to selling Rakitic, it seems like, they didn't get the money they wanted over the summer, and he wasn't sold quick enough, but that's the problem. That I think Rakitic should already be out of the club. It's messed up things in the locker room. It's nothing to do with Rakitic. He was fine against Leganés. He's still a fantastic player that deserves to be starting week in and week out somewhere else and could start for any other club. It's just we have De Jong and Artur and Busquets, so that's the issue with Rakitic. But yeah, he's got to be sold on for two different reasons. And then there are other players that are going to have to be sold on. They're going to have to hope that they get something for Coutinho. But again, if they're just making sure that they can balance the books, then there's no new players going to be coming in for quite some time. And there's some worrying signs there. And the bigger issue that we keep talking about with the board too is I've mentioned, these are, at the end of the day, they're really politicians representing the board. And what does a politician worry about? They worry about their term, and they worry about potentially being reelected, which this Bartomeu board already did. So with the upcoming election, why would they be worried about the time afterward? They're trying to get as much, they're worried about their legacy, and they have Lionel Messi, and they're trying to bring in trophies, and they're trying to worry about what's happening right now. So I would love to see, for some of our younger listeners, Kool-Aids that are, we'll say, in their late teens or in their early 20s even, I hope that you guys are still on board in 10 years from now when the way things are going, if things don't look as bright. So I hope you're still around then.
Well, let's hope so. The real fans that will stick through. Football is one of those sports in which you don't change teams. I was lucky that I was born in Barcelona. I wasn't supporting Barca, but otherwise I would be supporting somebody else because I think it has to go beyond just the football, sort of moving around the pitch and hitting that net. In terms of the questions, Arturo Vidal actually is being a savior of the bench, and he's bringing some energy and some cojones that nobody else in the team seems to be bringing. So at least he's got that.
Yeah. Here's a question from Pancho for you. If Barca dropped to the Europa League, would it be good if he won that trophy?
No, I don't care. I literally could not care less. If they don't win the Champions League, I'm happy for them to pack away and play FIFA online for the rest of the year. Well, I don't care about the Europa League at all. I don't even want to entertain that question.
Well, I think that's a funny thing. I think we can say that coming from a place of privilege that Barca should be getting the Champions League, but listen, a trophy is a trophy, sure. At the end of the day, they'll say, oh, they won the Europa League, and I think you take the trophy, but I think the interesting point there is how we feel about the Copa del Rey. So many other teams, when they win the Copa del Rey, it's one of the only trophies that they win, and it'd be a landmark moment. Think if Alaves had beaten Barca a few seasons ago for the Copa del Rey trophy. That would have been maybe the largest moment of their history, because so many clubs never get a trophy ever. They don't never get one of the major trophies. So it would be an important moment for them in their time. But Barca we've won so much, and the Champions League is the goal, that even the Liga trophies are falling by the wayside. And as I continue to argue, the Liga trophies, particularly the dominance of La Liga over the last 10 years, I think coming 20, 30 years from now, when I look back in the history books, what Barca are doing in the Spanish First Division, and I really do hope, because obviously domestic football, as the world has gotten closer, you and I are talking across an ocean. You were born in Catalonia, I was born in the U.S., and yet you and I have this really good friendship and relationship, and we're talking, and now you've moved to Qatar in the Middle East, and we're hours and hours and thousands of miles away, and we're speaking. And as the world has gotten closer in this way, we do have almost myopic view on just bigger and bigger trophies, and it has to be that these global brands get the global trophies. So I think we do go away from how important and the significance of domestic football as the world has shifted their view away from domestic football. But that said, Liga is still a competition where we play the most games, and that's the one that matters the most. But going back to that final point, putting a bow on this Europa League point, I would not be frustrated at all to see Barcelona's quote-unquote B team then be inserted into that competition. And if the likes of, it won't be Todibo. Now you remind me about that. Now I'm all frustrated and flustered again. But if the likes of if the likes of Wage and Arturo Vidal, sure, or Ansu Fati, if those are your starters and they still win the Europa League, but you get them valuable time, that's tremendous. And I think if Barca were to drop down to the Europa League, I think, again, as I've been saying, that's the only way that Ernesto Valverde is not the manager of this team. I don't think any result in the league is going to do that to him. But if he were knocked out in the Champions League here with the next 2 weeks between Dortmund and Inter Milan, you might have a new Barca manager in January. And I think they're going to be given the room and the place and the ability to be able to play whatever and whoever they want. So if they're in the Europa League, I think it's very possible that Moussa Wagué would be the right back in the Europa League, and that's not too crazy. But yeah, whether or not that trophy is going to feel good, I agree with you. No one is going to be excited about the Europa League trophy. Zero Kool-Aids, 100%.
And also, this manager has the best player in football history, still at the top of his powers, even though it doesn't look like it, because obviously the rest of the team and the manager himself are not allowing him to shine as he should. The third best goal scorer in Barca history in Luis Suarez. The striker that everyone around the world wanted, which was Griezmann this summer, made a waste out of the best player that Liverpool had a couple of seasons ago, that pretty much every team in the world wanted as well. Dembele, one of the most promising strikers of wingers and forwards in world football, pretty much wasted. And the list goes on and on and on. I mean, De Jong, that's the midfield that everyone wanted this season too, and look at where we are. I think even speaking about Europa League is just a step too far for my poor little soul.
Yeah, no, I agree. It goes back to No, it's true. It goes back to the fundamental point that other than Messi, who seems to be so self-motivated that he was going to improve no matter who's... I mean, if you are on the touchline, Messi's going to continue to get better. That's just the way Messi is. But who else among them has improved their game other than Nelson Semedo? But the other argument is that if Nelson Semedo stayed at Benfica, he might be at the level that he's at now. And that might just have been his natural linear progression as a footballer. So, yeah, I do... Then this does go on Valverde. Once again, we asked, and I asked this last year, I asked this almost 2 years ago, but that was his first season, so he didn't have as much time. But I asked who's improved, who's gotten better. You can't say Ansu Fati has, because Ansu Fati showed up as a 16-year-old the way he is. So I hope Ansu Fati gets better, but the bar for him is already pretty high. So let's talk about De Jong, though, as you bring him up, because he's been great for Holland. We watched him at Ajax now last season, and he was one of the best midfielders in the world. Yes, it doesn't matter, the Ballon d'Or trophy, but he is certainly a nominee, and that says something about the player that he is. But Vilmos asked, do you think, and Vilmos put on his conspiracy hat for this, so we're not going to play that game, Vilmos, but he asked, do you think Bartomeu and his friends convinced De Jong to choose Barca by inserting a clause in his contract related to how much he will play? It seems like he plays almost every game. It feels strange that he plays every game while others are dropped mostly without any sense, like Artur, Alenya, Rakitic. They don't get any say in that. And Vilmos says, don't get me wrong, he delivers mostly, but he did not raise our midfield that much either to earn this untouchable status.
Oh, okay. So who are we playing instead then?
I agree.
This is one of the best players we have signed in the last 5 years. He is a youngster. He has proven that at 21 years old, he was and still is one of the best midfielders in Europe. And he's in our team, so he will play every game. I see nothing wrong with that. I mean, who are you going to play? Arturo Vidal in his position. I mean, I think Valverde is doing the right thing playing him. Whether he's playing him in his favorite position, where he should be playing it, that's up for debate. I think still he should be taking Busquets' position and let it be. We may get worse for a month, but things would improve if he was playing as a defensive mid. But without a doubt, I think De Jong, given his age as well, doesn't even need to be rotated. I think he should play every game in full. Yeah. Absolutely agree with the manager there.
Yeah, he is 22 years old. I'm not worried about his fitness at all. If he's banged up, then rotate him. I do think players should be rotated. But yes, because De Jong, as you mentioned, can play both in that pivot, and he can also play as one of the two in front of that pivot, that he could play every match at one of those two positions, whether Busquets is on the field or whether you do play. In the imaginary fantasy world that we live in, where Alenya is a bench player or a part of the rotation, or Sergio Roberto's in the midfield, you can still play De Jong in one of those three positions. So, yeah, I think I'm not worried about that. And as cynical as it is, even if Vilmos is right about there's a clause in his contract saying that he has to play X amount of games, or I don't think it's that he chooses when to play. They don't do that.
There wouldn't be.
No, it doesn't work that way. So I think, that's and that's the funny thing. So, even hypothetically, even if
player that gets signed for Barca has a clause in which they have to, because of the decreto, have to play. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and even at 22, as I said, even at 22, even if there was a hypothetical clause like that, not that he would choose to play, but just that he has an X amount of games, and that's fine too, because he's worth that at the moment. I mean, again, he's one of the top midfielders in the world, even at his young age, and he, in theory, is improving and is only going to get better. So I hope that we got better as this show went on. I think both of us had our soapboxes here in this one. I think, Francesc, for first time in a while, we both got pretty wound up.
I think it's more what Valverde is making us watch every game. That's what
that
really,
doesn't help. Yeah,
it's hurting our souls.
Yeah, so it's interesting because this show, we hope that there's a lot of things we're wrong about, but the next time you're going to hear us in your ears on this podcast, we're going to have played Dortmund and Atletico Madrid. So I'm interested to see what happens here. I want to wish all of the people in the U.S. and anybody else maybe around the world who might be celebrating a happy Thanksgiving. We'll be in your ears on the next time. So you can check in your app, check out the show notes. As you know, social media, at the Barcelona Pod, at HiltonD13 for me, on Instagram, at the Barcelona Pod, closed Facebook group where these questions were received, tbpod.link/group. And then you can also help us on Patreon, as always, tbpod.link/Patreon, as well on YouTube. And this is the one I want to circle here. I know that everybody goes everywhere, helps us out everywhere, but on YouTube, subscribe to that. I just want to get some momentum, get some of that stuff out. We had a question actually in the Facebook group this week asking about when Barcelona managers get sacked, and I actually had done a YouTube video about that a few weeks ago, about different managers over the past, whether it was Louis van Gaal or basically what is the precedent about Valverde getting sacked mid-season? How often do Barcelona do that? And it might not be in Bartomeu's ideas or mindset to do that, but it has happened. It is possible, but it doesn't happen too often. And you go over to YouTube, check out that video from a few weeks ago, and we've also got new content coming out each and every week as well. So you can check it out on YouTube at the Barcelona Podcast. Hit the subscription button as easy as you like. So I think that wraps up everything for this one. Francesc, you good to go?
Let's go, and let's come back with 6 more points next time, shall we?
Sounds good. So thanks so much for listening to the Barcelona Podcast. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. And Forza Barca.
Forza.